Hey guys, welcome to Pancreas Pals. Emily here.
And Christie.
And this week we are gonna, take it back a little bit to what we wish we'd known when we were first diagnosed. This comes, I think, on my 8th diaversary, pretty much to the week. Christy, you've had it for about 10, no,
Yeah,
10.
it's gonna be my formal official decade this July.
So we're gonna, yeah, oh my God, I didn't realize how like kind of close our diaversaries were.
Neither did I.
Month-wise, wild times. But kind of taking a look back, especially as we get some new listeners hopping on the pod. A lot of newly diagnosed folks are listening, and we feel for you, we hear you, and we were you. So, to kind of kick things off, Christy actually mentioned this. Let's maybe I'll do like a little bit of like a not a dictionary, but a little definition of some of terms that we're probably going to use. But if you're super new to type 1 diabetes or any type of diabetes that involves insulin, we call bolusing is when you give yourself insulin that's either a correction or for a meal. No one quote me on this. I'm not reading this out of a dictionary. This is just my, this is just my life and how I'm defining this. But Christy had a good tip that she wished she'd known that I wanted to start off with because that's honestly something that is a huge one. So take us away.
So I remember because I was diagnosed when I was 17. So I have a very clear memory of my diagnosis and like sitting in my diabetes classes when I was in the hospital.
Head
And
back to season 1, episode 1 to listen to Christy's diagnosis story.
when I woke up from my coma, I was immediately thrown into the diabetic classroom. That sounds like a joke, but it is.
Sorry, I just die. If people don't, you really have to listen to Christy's diagnosis story to understand this, but continue because otherwise it sounds, well, it's terrifying either way. But Christy was in a coma when she was first diagnosed, but she's with us now. So continue.
Feeling super conscious today. It's all good. I just really remember being told a lot of rules, and I am a rule follower. I'm a big note taker. I follow the rules. I don't think
That's
any
why Christy and
cops,
I are friends.
no cops out there would disagree. I don't have a record of any kind. I like to follow the rules. So I remember one of the biggest rules that they told me when it came to bolusing for a meal was that you give all of your insulin up front. You take it immediately before you eat. You can't take it minutes before you eat. You can't take it after. You have to take all of the insulin that you're going to have for that meal immediately before you take it. So I was kind of obsessive for a while about getting my plate together and then immediately taking the insulin. I don't know what I thought was going to happen if I, realized I had to go to the bathroom and then came back to eat. But as time has gone on and I've spoken to different doctors, gotten new information, as I just said, it's been about a decade. So I don't know if this was a practice that was more popular back then that has shifted, like if the medical professionals, if their attitude towards pre-meal and post-meal bolusing has changed. But I feel like it was in the last year or two, working with a new endocrinologist, that I found out you absolutely can bolus after the meal. In fact, if you are going to estimate, I tend to look at plates and I don't really estimate by carb, I estimate by unit. Like when I look at a serving of rice that I'm going to have, I don't think how many carbs is that. My brain does like how many units is that. There actually is a technique where you can split your bolus. So you can take half of the amount of units before you eat and half after, or any ratio that works for you. You can take 3/4 before and then a quarter after. And in fact, you can also take your insulin up to like 15, 20 minutes before you're going to eat, and then also take units afterwards. That way, you already have some insulin like pumping through your system when you sit down to eat. And then, especially if I'm on the lower side, the post meal bolusing has been huge for me because
It helps you avoid that crash.
it helps you avoid the crash and also the spike afterwards, because food sometimes takes a little while to digest. So if you're sitting at like a cool 90, but you are going to have a big meal, if you take all of your insulin up front, there's a natural just kind of like flow, which having the CGM has been hugely helpful to watch. But, that might come down a little bit and then go back up. But if you are getting the low alert, you were at 90 before the meal, and then you're getting alert like, hey, you're at 75, 74, and you're like, oh my God, why is this going down? It's because you had so much insulin in your system and you're still digesting. So if you can take a little bit of insulin before and a little bit after, or take it all after if you're like riding on the lower side, but you're going to have a bigger meal. Like this was all just huge news to me, and it has been so helpful. I wish I had known that I could give myself insulin after the meal and that I can give myself insulin like 20 minutes before the meal. There are a bunch of strategies there that no one told me about when I was 17.
So there are a few caveats to this. First, I want to say that Christie, it's important to point out that Christie was using multiple daily injections, MDI, which I
I
feel like
still am.
still is
Always
using this.
always
But
and forever if I can.
I mean, like back in the hospital when she was first diagnosed. So when I was first on MDI, I was told the same thing, but I have since learned when I got a pump a few months later that had capabilities of dividing the bolus for you, or like increasing a temporary basal to give you more, make up that bolus over time. Basal's the background insulin that I get from my pump, or it would be similar to like a long acting insulin for multiple daily injection. But basically, I think that a lot of diabetes educators and endocrinologists kind of like are in not crisis mode, but it's so much information at once. They kind of not leave stuff out on purpose, but they need you to take your insulin. So they're going to tell you, you know, like there's probably a bigger risk of forgetting to take insulin if you divide it up in this and that. But personally, getting on an insulin pump for me and having that kind of remind me or give me that insulin on my own, like that dividing that those boluses up actually has completely changed my life and my management. And I think that like the fact that you're doing that on MDI is amazing because you have to remember to do that. Like whereas my pump does it for for me pretty much. But I also think that it's interesting that the way a lot of endocrinologists and diabetes educators kind of approach type 2 diabetes, at least from my experience in people I've spoken to, but also the research I do for my day job at Prevention Magazine, where I'm like editing a lot of stories that are about type 2, since type 2 is so prevalent in the US. Um, I think that that's just some knowledge that a lot of type 2 insulin dependent diabetics aren't given, and it definitely affects your numbers. So, a big caveat is that about dividing your boluses is definitely looking at what's on your plate, like Christy said. And if you're having something that's all, you know, super fast acting carbs, so like a whole bunch of like oranges or like a fruit salad or something, not necessarily saying that's when to divide it up. But if you're having a normal, not normal, but like a very balanced meal of fiber, carbs, protein, fats, like what have you, that's usually when a diabetes educator, nutritionist, or whatever would be like, okay, yeah, definitely try out dividing stuff up here. So definitely speak with any professional about that before trying it for yourself. But if you have a CGM, which is a continuous glucose monitor, which Christy is now on, which we've had a few episodes checking in with her about because she recently got on it, like within the last year. Um, I think it's definitely worth trying it out. You get to see how your blood sugar is affected by dividing up those boluses, that insulin given at different intervals. And it's crazy to see how, you know, how different your roller coaster might be of numbers. Like, could be a slow monorail of numbers, which is what we all want, not an actual roller coaster, but literally like a subway. Or it could be, you know, like a kiddie coaster, which happens to me, but is normal, where I'll like oscillate 60 points during before and after a meal, but then, you know, come back down. It's such a good technique for covering so many different types of meals and carbs that like I wish that I'd known about it sooner too. But I understand why a lot of people aren't told it, but you heard it here, folks. So definitely ask your doctor and ask different people about that if you're like, what the hell are they talking about? But we're not talking about dividing your long acting insulin. This is specific for actual short acting. Long dividing,
Although,
yeah, dividing your long acting is
although,
good too if you're on multiple daily injections, right, Christy?
yeah, that actually is something else I was going to say. So, it very much varies depending on what type of long acting insulin that you're on. So, initially, I'm like going back here, I'm actually on my third different type. And as things have adjusted for me over the years, I was started on Novolog for short acting and Lantus for basal off the bat. I did that for years, and then I started rising overnight. I think is why I started going on the Toujeo, which doesn't last. It lasts for like 36 hours rather than that traditional 24. So I was only taking the Toujeo once a day, but basically there was overlap. So because it's an imperfect science for how long exactly the insulin will last. Like your 24-hour insulin might only last like 18 hours some days. Like
And
there's
it peaks at different times, like, there's just so many variables when it comes to that.
exactly. So the Toujeo, I think, was more geared towards holding you steady, but because there was that overlap overnight, it just helped. It helped me have that little bit of extra when I needed it,
The
but helped
dawn
me.
phenomenon. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
the
I
dawn phenomenon, for those who are curious, is often a phenomenon that occurs for a lot of different types of diabetics who kind of have a slow or drastic increase during dawn, where your blood sugar becomes more insulin resistant, and you're usually it has to do with either, I don't know, something about REM, I could be making that part up, or your long-acting insulin could be wearing off if you're on MDI. Right, Christy?
you're right. So you should definitely ask about like peaks and how long your insulin lasts, but just to know that you're not actually locked into one. Like I think that's something I wish that I had known because I thought Lantus was like it. I don't think I asked enough questions when I was diagnosed, but I just thought Lantus was like the long acting insulin. That's what you get. When I found out that there was another option, I just had to like ask for it. It blew my mind. And now, fast forward another couple years, I'm on a long acting called Levemir, which I actually take in, I split that dose. And something else I wish I had known, you don't have to split it evenly. So you don't have to take half in the morning, half at night. I take a different amount because I definitely have that dawn effect. I take several units in the evening and then I take 3 in the morning because I tend to drop a lot as we're like approaching dinner. So like late afternoon hour.
The witching hour.
The
Remember we used to
witching,
talk about this all the
yeah,
time?
because that's what my mom called it. And I was like, you know what, it really is an evil hour. So I don't need as much in my system then. So it makes sense for me to take the bulk of my long acting after dinner. So I have that in my system overnight. And then just so I have something in my system, I take only 3 units in the morning. But I remember when I was first working with my doctor about splitting these doses, and it makes sense to start by splitting it half and half. So I was doing 5 in the morning, 5 at night, just so that you can like tweak from there. But it is empowering to know that you have like you can do some experimentation. Like I only ever move things like a unit to start, like I think to split immediately and go, oh, I'm gonna take 9 at night and 1 in the morning. Like you shouldn't make a big adjustment like that without talking to somebody, but you can experiment, like slide by 1 unit in the morning, 1 unit at night, depending on like what your levels are looking like during the day. But I think knowing that you do have some agency there, and like I tend to keep my doctors overly aware, but a lot of times when I send an update to my doctor, like, hey, I started doing like only 3 units in the morning and 7 at night rather than 5 and 5, and it's going great. Like her response is just going to be good. Like,
Right?
man,
That's
good. That's fantastic. Good.
that leads me into something that I wish I'd known when I was first diagnosed, and that's after a certain amount of time, your doctors are really hands off. At least in that's probably because once you get below a certain A1C, or once you've had it for a certain amount of time, obviously, like, you get into a flow of things and no one knows your body like you do. But and I also, like, high key don't want a super hands-on doctor because I'm already super hands-on with my diabetes management as it is, and kind of the last thing I need is for a doctor to be like, "I need to see your reports every 2 weeks. I need to see this, this, and this." It's like, I'm not in a space like that right now in my life where that's necessary. There's nothing against that. A lot of people do prefer doctors like that and hands-on care, and that's great, whatever works for you. But I was kind of like, I had no idea that I could like shop around for doctors, or that like I could, you know, advocate for myself even a little bit as far as like figuring out, like you said, I had no idea that Toujeo even existed until right now. Like, I've never had a doctor approach me or even suggest anything other than Novolog or Humalog, which are basically the two main fast acting insulins. But ironically, obviously they're not going to suggest anything other probably than Fiasp, which is another fast acting one, which no one has said to me. I've just learned about it on my own. Um, but ironically, I was started off on Levemir as my long acting Christie, and
Really?
that's
That's what I'm on
yeah.
now.
But no one told me I could split it up, so I'm sure I might have been on MDI a little bit longer. Had
It only lasts for it, or it has a reputation at least for lasting only 18 hours.
That would make a lot of
So
sense.
so that's why they try to
Yeah,
split it, and it also does have a peak. I think it's 2 or 3 hours
after you take it is the
after
peak.
you
That
take it is when you peak. So that's why I take
that
it
makes a lot of
like later in
sense.
the evening, so that overnight when I'm starting to rise, it's kicking in. But then I also tend to be a little bit higher in the morning, so I like to take
You
it nice
take
and
another
early in the
shot.
morning before I exercise and like have my coffee and get ready for the day. So when I'm sitting to have breakfast, it's kind of moving again.
Now, a word from one of our sponsors. Hey, Christy, have you heard of US Med Supply?
I think I've seen a commercial for it. It's a medical supply company, right?
Yeah, but apparently they're the number one distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide, the number one specialty distributor for Omnipod Dash, and the number one fastest growing tandem distributor nationwide. Plus, they're rated as the number one distributor in Dexcom customer satisfaction surveys.
Ooh, sounds like something I need to check out. Do they partner with most insurance companies?
Yep, and they'll even help us get set up and work with our insurance companies so we don't have to spend hours on the phone.
The actual dream.
Right? We and all of our pals can head to usmed.com/pals or call 888-721-1516 to sign up now.
Already on their website.
And now back to the episode. That's great. Yeah, I think that that's definitely something I wish I'd known. I'm sure if any of my doctors are listening to this, like, and you told me, I'm sorry, maybe I just needed it drilled in a little bit more, but I'm really happy with where I'm at in terms of my pumps and my CGM. Well, I have one pump, insulin pump that is. I'm still on the Omnipod, which I have been on since after like 6 months after I was diagnosed. So a lot of this is to say I didn't necessarily take the time to look into a lot of this myself, but I was also 20 years old when I was diagnosed. I was in college, I was at an internship, I was doing all of these things. But diabetes was obviously never really on the back burner for me. Um, that's just my personality. I'm way too concerned with all these things. But I think that having that agency and being able to divide up your long acting sounds amazing. So hopefully if you're listening, definitely talk to your doctor. Don't just like take it on yourself
I
unless you
feel
feel
like
like you
you
could.
can
But
you can probably split up any kind. I think just some have a
yeah,
reputation for being more
I just mean
effective if you split them
legally,
up.
we have to say that. Legally,
Yeah.
talk to your doctor, talk to a medical professional. Christy and I are not medical professionals,
No,
even though we feel like
what
we are.
works for us is not supposed to be and so you should do it this way too. It's just this is what has historically worked for us.
Right. And when Miriam comes on to discuss her pregnancy, I know that she actually found an extra hybrid way of managing crazy, not crazy, I gotta stop using that word, wild fluctuations in blood sugar without having to use huge amounts of insulin. So, like, she'd keep on her insulin pump, but then also add in MDI to help fight some of those peaks and valleys, roller coasters, if you will. So, all this is to say, yes, we're super privileged. We have all of these abilities to use CGMs and pumps, what have you, but there is actually so many things available that people don't talk about, whether that be savings cards for like different insulins or different glucagons, which are fast acting, like if you pass out from a low blood sugar type of thing. It's like an EpiPen for diabetics, but like not, because it's kind of more chemically and medically involved. It's a giant syringe. If you use the old school glucagon, now there's this thing called Baqsimi, which we are not sponsored by, but it sounds like we are. Which is like basically an inhaler. Well, it goes in your nose. It's a nose
It's like
spray
a
that
nose spray. I have it in the other room.
me too. Hopefully we never have to use it, knock on wood, but it definitely makes things a lot less scary when you're having to rely on other people to revive you. Because a lot of people get really scared when you show them that glucagon needle. Also, it can be intimidating to show others how to use said glucagon needle. So being like, this has the pictures and it's a spray up your nose, you don't have to inject me, is like a lifesaver. So that's another tip. Now, we have these newer medicines, if you will, that are available, and there are savings cards that are available for them too. But I had one more thing that I wanted to bring up. Oh, my big thing is that this is also mostly for our fellow US citizens, because anywhere that has nationalized healthcare, I'm sure this doesn't apply to you, but you can ask for a different meter. Like I had I've basically had pretty much every type of meter, like glucose meter, not continuous glucose monitor, but meter, so finger prick, what have you, to check my blood sugar over the past 8 years, because I've had like 4 different insurances, because every time I get a new job, I'm on a different insurance, and then also I was on my dad's insurance for a while when I was a youth and got to have that.
I
I
know you
miss
said
that.
that. I was like, oh, I remember not making those monthly
CBT.
payments.
Oh god. I can't. I can't.
It was
Don't
a
get me
simpler
started.
time.
Yeah, US healthcare, man. What a time. Anyways, I remember being like told I had to use the meter. Was it the Omnipod? I don't remember. I had to use some meter and I hated it. It took
I have the
forever.
Freestyle Light.
Oh my god, me too, I
Has
think.
the little butterflies on it. I do like it for that reason.
Oh no, that was my favorite one. And then my current insurance made me get an AccuCheck. But basically, I didn't know that there were meters out there that had backlights. So like, if I need to check my blood sugar, I know the Freestyle Light has this. In the middle of the night, it had a little light, so I wouldn't have to like wake Matt up, or I wouldn't have to get out of bed in my dorm room to like go, figure this stuff out, what have you. Huge game changer for me personally. And sorry, go ahead, Christy.
No, no, I was just going to say something I found out recently because, especially when I was still getting used to the CGM, I was checking like freakishly a lot. And we've talked about this too, like those first 2 or 3 days from changing your CGM, I check with my finger sticks a lot.
Yeah.
Um, that backlight, it should always be working if the meter is fully charged. At least this is true on the Freestyle Light because that's what I use. If at any point you turn on the light and the entire meter just dies, or like you don't get the reading, it turns off, it's not a bad finger stick. Your meter has low battery and you need to get a new one.
Okay, I will say the Freestyle Light burned through battery like nobody's business compared to the AccuCheck Guide.
It's happened for me in the last couple of years. I'm just like so used to it that
Yeah, no, I love those though.
it's worth it for me. It's like
It's so small.
I always have a backup one like ready to go. But just
Same.
FYI, if it the whole thing shuts down when you try to turn on the light, you need to get a new one because that's gonna die.
You heard it here first, pals. Giving you the hot tips from all the different meters. But I I, have been scouring uh the what's covered and what's not. A lot of companies have no idea what they actually cover in terms of diabetes supplies. So you have to talk to the insurance company, which will then send you back to your company, which what have you. It's a long line of things. But basically, I did my research and I found out that I would still get covered a good amount with this. I think there are only 3 meters that have backlights. By backlights, I mean like the little port where you insert the test strip. That's the big thing for me. It sounds like such a small thing, but let me tell you, it makes my life so much easier. But basically, I asked about it. My doctor prescribed it. And it ended up being, even though it wasn't preferred, I think it was just $1 more or something a month, which for me was worth it. So again, it kind of goes back to all the stuff we talk about, advocating for yourself and asking questions and um, trial and error. This is the disease that is all about trial and error. And I wish someone had told me that also, because I feel like when they send you home with
It
it
still
still
is. Like
is. They,
I'm constantly seeing what different foods at different times of day are doing. Like
and
your research is never over.
it's never over because
You'll always be experimenting.
the insulin that I needed 5 years ago is so different than the insulin I need now. And yeah,
Oh,
I was
100%.
honeymooning, but like it's even when you reach like 20, like you've had diabetes for 20 years, your body's constantly changing, especially if you identify or if you have a uterus, I'll say, you have hormones and those hormones are constantly changing. And that in itself will make things hell for inconsistency reasons. So
It can and it will.
yeah, it'll make itself known, that uterus. But yeah, That's my 5 cents, a little bit more than 2 cents. Like, I remember feeling guilty when I had to go up like, when I'd see how much insulin I was using at the end of the day, and I was like, "Oh my god, does this mean I'm not eating well? Does this mean, like, my sugars are out of whack?" Whatever. But I realized, A, I was getting tighter, management, like, I was staying within my Dexcom lines, if you will, more frequently, but B, I was also enjoying food more and I was doing all these other things. But like, I remember my doctor being like, "Oh, you don't want to go over like 12 units a day." This is like when I was like honeymooning or something. But then, fast forward 2 years, obviously not honeymooning anymore. And I'm using like 30 units a day.
I was gonna say
It's,
that is not accurate. That is
yeah,
not where I'm at.
yeah, 12 was a bad number. It was probably like 22, but it's still okay. Like whatever you need, there's no one right answer as long as you are feeling good and taking care of yourself. So that is, I think, the big, yeah, basically everything's going to change. If were recently diagnosed, get a hang of it now, but know that it is a disease of trial and error, and hopefully there'll be a cure one day, but until then, we're constant experiments. But honestly, sometimes it can be like when you nail that bolus, when you nail that blood sugar
Oh.
landing, it's like chef's kiss. I mean, also when you don't, it can feel like fresh hell. But no one puts in the work but you. Even the yeah, caregivers when you're younger for sure, but once you're doing your own management, which like at some point we all need to do, it's exhausting. So when you get those wins, you got to celebrate those wins.
That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I went off on a tangent. Did you have anything else you wish you'd known, Christy?
No, I think you summarized it really well there. I don't know when I was diagnosed, I was told like this is forever, you'll never get rid of this, but I wish that it had been phrased to me in that way, just like you're never going to be perfect at this. Because I
Right.
think I was waiting for that feeling for a number of years where I was like, all right, so eventually I'll be able to eat whatever I want and dose and like never ever ever be out of range because I'll just know, like I'll just never ever have a problem. I'll never ever be low when I'm out with friends. I'll never ever be high when I'm home and sitting on the couch. Like I'll just know how to avoid that. Like what works for you one day might not work the next, and it's such a frustrating feeling, but it's
It's
not
okay.
forever. It's okay, and that part is not forever. Like just know that all of the bad feelings, those don't last. Like the disease is never going anywhere, but
We hope it
when
will one day, but we're not gonna give anyone false hope here. So for now, this is how to
again, not
cope with
not
it.
not medical professionals, but
Not medical
yeah,
professionals.
I wish that it had been laid out for me in a little bit more of a hopeful way. Just like the expectation is not perfection. Like you shoot for that 100 as often as you can, but like
It's okay to be
it's okay.
200. It's okay.
It
Nothing is
happens.
perfect.
It happens to
Yeah.
the best of us. But I think
I
just understanding that like I didn't fail if I
Right.
go out of my
There
bounds.
there's just, like, such a what's the like, a connection, at least for me, um, being a little bit of a perfectionist or just caring so much about getting things right, which, I'm in therapy for, which helps, with my diet. Like, I see a therapist who has type 1 diabetes and, like, she's great and she'll, kind of help manage those, but, like, those expectations that I put on myself, but I feel like a lot of that has to do with what we're told at the beginning of diagnosis, and, like, there's no right way to tell someone they have type 1 diabetes, right? Like, there's no cure for it right now. There's a whole bunch of great technology and management if you're privileged enough to get it, and, I think that it's hard because they have to doctors and medical professionals have to drill in the importance of taking care of yourself, but 9 times out of 10, that terrifies the person being diagnosed. So, because the fact of the matter is, it's a scary disease. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, "Oh, I'm never anxious about it," or "I've totally landed, how to cope with something," let alone how to actually bolus for something, but actually how to cope with something. It's something that we're continuously learning, like, we're continuously learning about our bodies. So, I think that kind of, like, as the years go by, I've noticed that I have to give myself more of a break. which is weird to think because you'd think as the longer you have a disease, the more you'd nail everything. But my expectations for myself have changed where I'm like, I've had this disease for longer. Things do get easier at times in terms of like figuring out how many carbs are in something or, realizing, wow, fiber actually does, count for me I can subtract some fiber from this meal or add a longer extended bolus for some protein and fats. But the diabetes is still going to be there and not everything's not going to land at all every time. So realizing that like as long as my A1C is under 7 for me, which by the way, A1Cs are bullshit. Sorry for anyone listening who's like, living and dying by an A1C, but it's absolute trash. And I think it's something that we should never compare others to, or each other's to. I don't know, words are hard, but like people who post their A1Cs on social media, good for you, but also not my thing. I'm like, I don't want anyone to see a number and be like, well, why am I not there? Or, am I doing something wrong? This disease is hard enough as it is without having to compare yourself to someone else. Like my body is my body. It's not the same as anyone else's, and no one else should have an opinion on it. Like I will
Girl,
go off on a
preach.
tangent about that. Ugh, it drives me insane when I see people like, oh my God, you have like a 5.3 A1C. Like, that's huge. Congratulations. You should absolutely celebrate that, what have you. But I don't want to put that in someone else's face. Like, I don't, that can make or break someone's day for sure. So, pals, if anyone ever asks me what my A1C is, I'm going to tell you to check yourself in a loving way and less intense than I just did right now. But I don't even know where I was going with this other than it gets better. It doesn't always get easier, but it gets better, I should say. Right?
Yes.
I don't know. Circle back with me in a week. I'm sure I'll have a different opinion. Depends on the
But
week I
but
have.
so is T1D. Check in
Right?
with us next week.
Yeah. That pretty much wraps us up. I think my long tirades, tangents. I hope some people took some good actionable things away from this. Definitely look into splitting up your boluses or your basals, or I don't even know, anything you want. Check in with a medical professional. We're not doctors. Yeah, if you if you made it through, congrats. Follow us on Instagram at pancreas_pals, on Facebook at pancreaspalspp. Email us on the emails on the Gmail, pancreaspals123@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys. I swear we do have some exciting people we're interviewing coming up, including hearing from Miriam, and maybe hearing some cute noises from Max, little Bebe Max, the latest pal to join the clan. But as
An honorary
always,
pal.
yes, forever. Hopefully he's never an actual pancreas pal. We hope his pancreas continues on, but we have actually pancreatically capable pals, so I shouldn't say that. We don't discriminate based on beta cells. Anywho, yeah, I'm spiraling. So everyone have a great week. Christy, as always, you are effervescent and a joy.
It's a pleasure to be here. Happy to talk, Em.
All right, everyone have a great rest of your week. Bye.
Bye.
Today's episode was brought to you by US Med Supply. Thanks for listening. Hey, Christy, have you heard of US Med Supply?
I think I've seen a commercial for it. It's a medical supply company, right?
Yeah, but apparently they're the #1 distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide, the #1 specialty distributor for Omnipod Dash, and the #1 fastest growing tandem distributor nationwide. Plus, they're rated as the #1 distributor in Dexcom customer satisfaction surveys.
Ooh, sounds like something I need to check out. Do they partner with most insurance companies?
Yep, and they'll even help us get set up and work with our insurance companies so we don't have to spend hours on the phone.
The actual dream.
Right? We and all of our pals can head to usmed.com/pals or call 888-721-1516 to sign up now.
Already on their website.